The slap echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot. 23-year-old Arya Vale stood at the altar beside Darian Viscari, a 65-year-old crime lord who controlled every shadow in Valadoro and did what no one in that room would ever dare. She struck him, hard, in front of 400 witnesses who held their breath waiting for blood. Her father had sold her like livestock. Her groom wore power like a second skin. And Arya? She was about to discover that the most dangerous prisons aren't built with bars. If you want to see how this ends, stay until the final word. Hit like, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and let's begin. The morning of Arya Vale's wedding, she woke up wanting to set something on fire. Not the dress hanging like a ghost in her closet. Not the roses her mother kept arranging and rearranging downstairs with shaking hands. Something bigger. Something that would make the sky turn black and force everyone in Valadoro to stop what they were doing and actually look at what was happening. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They were small hands. Unremarkable. The kind that had never thrown a punch or held a weapon or done anything more violent than slam a door. But today they were supposed to place a ring on Darian Viscari's finger and pretend that meant something other than ownership. Her father's voice drifted up from the hallway, loud, jovial, the kind of tone men use when they're trying to convince themselves they haven't done anything wrong. "She'll be fine, Margaret. The Viscaris are a good family. Old money. Respect." Arya's mother said nothing. She never did anymore. Arya stood and walked to the window. From here, she could see the harbor, the place where Valadoro curved around the water like a question mark. Fishing boats dotted the marina. Beyond them, cargo ships moved in slow procession, carrying things that didn't belong to the people who loaded them. This city had always worked that way. Someone else owned everything. Someone else decided who got what. Today, someone else had decided she belonged to Darian Viscari. She didn't know much about him. Nobody really did. He was 65 years old, which made her skin crawl every time she thought about it. He ran half the port operations in Valadoro, which was a polite way of saying he controlled the docks, the shipments, the unions, and the police who pretended not to notice. He had been married once, decades ago. His wife died. People didn't talk about how. Arya had seen him twice before today. Once at a gala her father dragged her to, where Darian stood in the corner surrounded by men who laughed too hard at everything he said. Once at a restaurant, where he sat alone at a table by the window, reading a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. Both times, she had felt his eyes on her. Not leering, not hungry, just watching. Like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve. When her father told her about the arrangement 3 months ago, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She asked one question. Why? Her father, Vincent Vale, looked at her the way you look at a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Because I made a promise," he said. "And because you'll be taken care of." "Taken care of," Arya repeated. "Like a pet. Like a wife." "I don't love him. I don't even know him." Vincent's expression hardened. "Love is a luxury, Arya. Security isn't." That was the end of the conversation. For 3 months, she had tried to find a way out. She looked into her father's finances and found nothing but smoke. She asked her mother for help and got silence. She even considered running, but where would she go? Valadoro wasn't the kind of place you just left. It had roots. It had weight. And if you tried to disappear, someone always found you. So here she was, wedding day, no way out. Her mother knocked softly on the door. "Arya, sweetheart, it's time to start getting ready." Arya didn't turn around. "I don't want to do this." Her mother stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Margaret Vale was 48, but looked older. Life had worn her down to something pale and tired. She crossed the room and put a hand on Arya's shoulder. "I know," she said quietly. "Then why are you letting this happen?" Margaret's hand trembled. "Because I don't have a choice either." Arya turned to face her. "What does that mean?" But her mother just shook her head and picked up the dress. The cathedral was older than the city itself. Stone walls, stained glass, vaulted ceilings that made every sound feel like it came from somewhere holy. Arya hated it immediately. She stood in the back room with her mother and 2 women she didn't know, both of them fussing over her dress, her hair, her makeup. They kept smiling at her like this was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "You look beautiful," one of them said. Arya didn't respond. Through the door, she could hear the murmur of guests filling the pews. 400 people, her father had said. Business associates, family friends, people who wanted to be seen at a Viscari wedding. None of them gave a damn about her. Her father appeared in the doorway, already wearing his tuxedo. He looked proud. That was the worst part. He actually looked proud. "Ready?" he asked. "No?" He smiled like she'd made a joke. "You'll do fine, just remember to smile." He offered his arm. Arya stared at it for a long moment, then took it because refusing would only delay the inevitable. They walked down the corridor toward the main hall. The music started. Pachelbel's canon. Of course it was. Every terrible wedding had the same soundtrack. The doors opened. 400 faces turned toward her. Arya's first instinct was to run. Her second was to scream. Her third was to look straight ahead and find the man she was about to marry. Darien Viscari stood at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than her father's car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed back and a face that gave nothing away. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just waited. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, every step feeling like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff. When they reached the altar, Vincent kissed her cheek and whispered, "Be good." Then he placed her hand in Darien's. His hand was warm, rough, the hand of someone who had built things and broken them. The priest began speaking. Arya didn't hear a word of it. All she could feel was the weight of Darien's hand around hers and the eyes of 400 strangers watching her pretend this was normal. The priest said something about vows. Darien spoke first. His voice was low, steady, completely devoid of emotion. "I, Darien Viscari, take you, Arya Vale, to be my wife." The words sounded like a contract, not a promise, a transaction. The priest turned to her. "Arya, do you take Darien to be your husband?" She looked at Darien, really looked at him. He met her gaze without flinching. There was no warmth in his eyes, no kindness, but no cruelty either, just control, total, absolute control. And something inside her snapped. She pulled her hand free. "No," she said. The cathedral went silent. The priest blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no." Her father stood up in the front pew. "Arya?" She turned to face Darien fully. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to buy me like I'm something off a shelf." Darien didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with those unreadable eyes. "Say something," she demanded. He didn't, so she slapped him. The sound cracked through the cathedral like thunder. Her palm stung. Her whole arm shook. Darien's head turned slightly from the impact, and for one horrible second she thought he was going to hit her back. Instead, he straightened, touched his jaw, and looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. The priest stammered. "Perhaps we should take a moment." "No," Darien said quietly. "Continue." The priest stared at him. "Sir, I don't think you'll—" "Continue." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. The priest swallowed hard and turned back to Arya. "Do you take Darien to be your husband?" Her father was halfway up the aisle now, his face red with fury. "Arya, you will answer him right now." "Yes," she said. Everyone froze. She looked at Darien. "Yes, I'll marry you, not because I want to, not because I have a choice, but because I'm not going to give you or my father or anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching me break." Darien's expression didn't change. "Understood." The priest looked between them like he was witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Then he cleared his throat and finished the ceremony in record time. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He didn't say the part about kissing. Nobody wanted to see what would happen if he did. Darien took her hand again, carefully this time, like she might bolt, and led her back down the aisle. The crowd stared in stunned silence. No one clapped. No one smiled. They just watched as Arya Vale walked out of the cathedral and into a life she hadn't chosen. The reception was held at the Viscari estate, a sprawling mansion on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. Arya had never been inside before. She'd only seen it from the road, a white stone fortress surrounded by gates and guards and high walls that kept the world out, or kept people in. The car ride from the cathedral was silent. Darian sat beside her in the back of a black sedan, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. Arya stared out the window and tried not to think about what came next. When they arrived, a team of staff greeted them at the front entrance. Arya recognized none of them. They all smiled politely and called her Mrs. Viscari, like the name had always belonged to her. The reception hall was filled with the same 400 people who had watched her slap her husband at the altar. They milled around with champagne glasses and appetizers, talking in low voices about business and weather and everything except the bride who had just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful men in Valedoro. Arya stood near the entrance and felt like she was drowning. A woman approached, mid-50s, elegant, with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. "You must be Arya. I'm Elena. I manage the household." "Nice to meet you." "Is it?" Elena's smile didn't waver. "Come, I'll show you to your room." "My room? You'll want to freshen up before dinner." Arya glanced at Darian, who was already surrounded by men in expensive suits. He didn't look her way. She followed Elena through a maze of hallways lined with dark wood paneling and oil paintings of people she didn't recognize. The house smelled like old money and older secrets. Elena stopped at a door near the end of the second-floor hallway. "This is yours." She opened it to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than Arya's entire apartment. 4-poster bed, walk-in closet, windows overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful in the way museum exhibits are beautiful, impressive, untouchable, completely lifeless. "Your things have already been moved in," Elena said. "If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand. Dial 0. "Where's Darian's room?" Elena gestured down the hall. "End of the corridor. He prefers privacy." Arya looked at her. "We're not sharing a room?" "Not unless you'd like to." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt like she'd just been cataloged and stored. Elena left her alone. Arya walked to the window and stared out at the water. The sun was setting, turning the ocean into a sheet of molten gold. It was the kind of view people paid fortunes for. It made her feel like she was in a postcard for someone else's life. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. Dinner was worse than the ceremony. It was held in a dining room large enough to host a small army, with a table that stretched the length of the room and enough silverware to make Arya feel like she was taking a test she hadn't studied for. Darian sat at the head. Arya sat to his right. Around them, business associates and their wives made small talk and pretended not to stare. A man across the table, late 40s, too much cologne, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, Arya, what do you do?" She looked at him. "I was in school." "Was?" "I dropped out." His smile faltered. "Oh, well, I'm sure you'll find plenty to keep you busy here." Another man chimed in. "Darian's very generous. You'll want for nothing." Arya set down her fork. "Except a say in my own life." The table went quiet. Darian sipped his wine and said nothing. The man who'd spoken first laughed nervously. "She's got spirit. I like that." "Do you?" Arya asked. He stopped laughing. Darian finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Gentlemen, my wife has had a long day. I'm sure you understand." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. The conversation shifted immediately. The men started talking about shipping routes and tariffs and things Arya didn't care about. She picked at her food and counted the minutes until she could leave. After what felt like hours, Darian stood. "If you'll excuse us." Everyone nodded. No one argued. Arya followed him out of the dining room, through the halls, and up the stairs. He stopped outside her bedroom door. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he said. She stared at him. "What?" "This house is large. There are guest rooms. If you'd prefer..." "I'd prefer not to be here at all." He nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm not going to pretend this was fair to you." Arya didn't know what to say to that. She'd been expecting threats, demands, something to justify the anger burning in her chest. Instead, he was just standing there, looking tired. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. "You don't need a wife. You don't need anything." Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father owed me a debt. I offered him a way to settle it. By taking me. By offering you protection." "From what?" He met her eyes. "From men worse than me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Arya wanted to scream at him, to tell him that protection wasn't the same as choice, that good intentions didn't erase the fact that she was standing in a stranger's house wearing a wedding ring she hadn't asked for. Instead, she said, "I slapped you." "I noticed. You didn't do anything. What did you expect me to do?" "I don't know. Hit me back. Yell. Something." Darian shook his head. "I don't hit women. And yelling wouldn't have changed anything." "Then why did you let the ceremony continue?" He studied her for a long moment. "Because walking away would have put you in more danger than staying." Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What does that mean?" But Darian just opened her bedroom door. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." He turned and walked down the hall toward his own room, leaving her standing there with more questions than answers. Arya didn't sleep. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the day. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, heard Darian's voice, felt the sting in her palm where she'd slapped him. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up and went downstairs. The house was silent. She wandered through the halls, half expecting someone to stop her, but no one did. She found a library, a study, a sitting room with furniture that looked like no one had ever sat in it. Everything was pristine, perfect, soulless. She ended up in the kitchen. It was massive, all stainless steel and marble countertops. She opened the fridge and found it fully stocked, grabbed a bottle of water and sat on the counter. That's where Darian found her. He appeared in the doorway wearing a plain white shirt and dark pants, looking like he hadn't slept either. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Arya shook her head. He walked to the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the opposite wall. They stood there in silence for a while. Not comfortable, not hostile, just two people who didn't know what to say to each other. Finally, Arya spoke. "Who was she?" Darian looked at her. "Who? Your first wife?" His expression shifted. Not anger, something quieter. "Her name was Catherine." "How did she die?" "Cancer, 23 years ago." Arya did the math. "You were 42. "Yes." "You never remarried?" "No." "Why now?" Darian set down his glass. "Because I'm 65 years old, and I'm tired of being alone." The honesty of it caught her off guard. She'd expected lies. Manipulation. Not this. "That's not a good reason to trap someone," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." "Then why did you do it?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, handed it to her. It was old, faded. A woman with dark hair and a bright smile standing in front of a house Arya didn't recognize. "That's Catherine," Darian said. "She was 22 when we met. I was 40. Everyone told her she was making a mistake." Arya looked up at him. "Was she?" "She didn't think so, but I always wondered." He took the photograph back and tucked it away. "I'm not her," Arya said quietly. "I know." "Then why?" "Because your father was going to sell you to someone who wouldn't care whether you lived or died. And I thought—" He trailed off, shook his head. "I thought maybe I could give you a chance at something better." Arya stared at him. "You call this better?" "No, I call it survivable." She wanted to be angry. She wanted to hate him, but all she felt was exhausted. Darian pushed off this wall. "You should get some rest." "I'm not tired." "Then sit here as long as you need. The house is yours." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry." And then he was gone. Arya sat alone in the kitchen and realized that the man she'd just married was nothing like what she'd expected, which somehow made everything worse. The next morning, Arya woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from somewhere downstairs. She got dressed slowly, putting on jeans and a sweater because she refused to wear anything that looked like she was trying to play the part of Mrs. Viscari. When she made it to the kitchen, she found Elena setting out breakfast. "Good morning," Elena said. "Mr. Viscari is in his study. He asked me to let you know you're welcome to join him." "Where's his study?" "Second floor, third door on the left." Arya poured herself coffee and made her way upstairs. She knocked on the door. "Come in." Darian's study was smaller than she'd expected. Bookshelves lined the walls. A desk sat near the window overlooking the ocean. Darian stood behind it reading something on his laptop. He looked up when she entered. "Sleep well?" "No." "Neither did I." He gestured to a chair across from the desk. Arya sat. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Darian said. "About not having a choice." "And?" "And you're right. You didn't choose this. But you're here now, and we need to figure out how to make it work." Arya crossed her arms. "How do you suggest we do that?" "By being honest with each other." "Fine. Honestly, I don't want to be here." "I know. And I don't trust you." "I wouldn't expect you to." She studied him. "Then what do you want from me?" Darian sat down. "I want you to live your life. Go back to school if you want. Work. Travel. Whatever you were planning before this happened. And if I want to leave?" He didn't hesitate. "Then you leave." Arya blinked. "You're saying I can just walk out?" "I'm saying I won't stop you." "Why?" "Because keeping you here against your will makes me no better than the men I've spent my life fighting." She didn't know what to say to that. Darian leaned back in his chair. "But before you make that decision, I need you to understand something. Your father's debt wasn't just money, it was protection. He made promises to people who don't forgive broken promises. And when I took you as my wife, I took on the responsibility of keeping you safe." "From who?" "People who would use you to get to me. Or to him." Arya felt her stomach twist. "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't care about collateral damage." She stood up. "You're telling me I'm a target. I'm telling you that as long as you carry my name, you're under my protection. And that protection is the only thing keeping you alive." Arya wanted to call him a liar, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't exaggerating. She sat back down. "So I'm trapped either way." "For now, yes." "How long?" "I don't know." She laughed bitterly. "Great, just great." Darian pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "This is everything I know about your father's situation. Read it. Then decide whether you still want to leave." Arya opened the folder and started reading. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. Quote, the folder contained shipping manifests, bank transfers, and names Arya didn't recognize. But the pattern was clear. Her father had been moving money through Darian's operations without permission, skimming profits and redirecting them to a family called the Salvatores. She looked up. "Who are the Salvatores?" "Competitors," Darian said. "They run cargo operations out of the South Harbor. For the last 5 years, they've been trying to take control of the northern docks, and my father was helping them." "Yes." Arya's hands tightened on the folder. "Why would he do that?" "Because Marco Salvatore promised him a way out of his debts. Your father believed him." "And you found out?" Darian nodded. 6 months ago. I gave him a choice. Work with me to fix it, or face the consequences. The consequences being me. The consequence being you under my protection instead of theirs." Arya threw the folder on the desk. "You're saying my father sold me to save himself. I'm saying he made a choice between bad options. And you thought taking me was the answer? I thought it was better than watching the Salvatores take you instead." The room felt too small. Arya stood and walked to the window. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Beautiful. Indifferent. "What would they have done to me?" she asked quietly. Darian didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "Nothing, you'd survive intact." Arya closed her eyes. She'd spent 3 months hating her father for this. Now she didn't know what to feel. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But underneath it all was something worse. Fear. The realization that the life she'd been living was built on foundations made of sand. "Does he know?" she asked. "About the Salvatores?" "He knows. And he still handed me over to you." "He handed you over to me because of it." Arya turned to face Darian. "So what happens now?" "Now we wait." "For what?" "For the Salvatores to make their next move." "And then?" Darian's expression hardened. "Then I finish what your father started." The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Arya spent most of her time exploring the house, which turned out to be far larger than she'd initially thought. There was a gym on the 3rd floor she never used, A greenhouse in the back garden filled with plants she didn't recognize, a wine cellar that looked like it belonged in a castle. She avoided Darian as much as possible. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, but because every conversation reminded her that she was living in a stranger's house, wearing a stranger's ring, and waiting for threats she couldn't see. Elena ran the household with quiet efficiency. She never asked questions, never offered opinions, and always seemed to know when Arya needed space. The other staff, a cook named Margot, 2 housekeepers whose names Arya kept forgetting, and a driver named Thomas, kept a polite distance. They treated her with deference, but it felt rehearsed, like they'd been trained on how to handle the boss's unwilling wife. Darian worked constantly. He left early, came home late, and spent most of his time locked in his study. When they did cross paths, at breakfast, in the hallway, once in the library when Arya was looking for something to read, he was always polite, courteous, careful not to get too close. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like living with a ghost. On the 4th night, Arya found herself back in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. Same counter, same bottle of water, different thoughts. She was halfway through convincing herself to go back to bed when Darian appeared in the doorway again. "This is becoming a habit," he said. "So is you finding me here?" He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter opposite her. This time, the silence felt less strange. "Can I ask you something?" Arya said. "Go ahead. Why haven't you—" She stopped, started again. "Why haven't you tried anything?" Darian raised an eyebrow. "Tried anything?" "You know what I mean." He set down his glass. "Because that's not why you're here." "Then why am I here?" "I already told you." "Protection, right." She looked at him. "But you didn't have to marry me for that. You could have just put me in a safe house somewhere." "I could have," Darian agreed. "But the Salvatores wouldn't have believed it. Marriage makes it real, public. It tells everyone in Valedoro that you're off limits. And if they don't care, then I make them care." There was no bravado in the way he said it, no posturing, just a statement of fact. Arya pulled her knees up to her chest. "Do you ever regret it?" "Marrying her." "Catherine." Darian was quiet for a long moment. "No. Even though she died, especially because she died. If I'd let fear stop me, I would have missed out on the best years of my life. But she left you alone." "She didn't leave. She died. There's a difference." Arya studied him. "Do you still love her?" "Every day." The way he said it, simple, absolute, made something in Arya's chest tighten. "I'm not going to fall in love with you," she said. Darian almost smiled. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "For you to stop looking at me like I'm the enemy. You took away my freedom." "No, I gave you a different kind of prison, and I know that's not the same thing, but it's the best I could offer." Arya didn't have an answer to that. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Darian stood. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I'm not tired. Neither am I. But we both need rest." He left her alone in the kitchen. Arya stayed there until dawn broke over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about choices and consequences, and the strange man she'd married who loved a ghost and treated her like she mattered. And for the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel quite so alone. A week after the wedding, Darian asked her to join him for dinner. Not a formal event, just the two of them. In the small dining room off the kitchen that Arya hadn't even known existed, she almost said no. But curiosity got the better of her. The table was set simply. 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine. Margot had made pasta, nothing fancy, just something that smelled like garlic and tomatoes and home. Darian was already seated when Arya arrived. He stood when she entered. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Old habits." She sat across from him. Margot served the food and disappeared. They ate in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. Finally, Darian spoke. "Elena tells me you've been reading in the library. There's not much else to do. You could go into the city, see friends." Arya looked at him. "Do you really think I have friends who'd want to see me after I married Darian Viscari?" He didn't argue. "Besides," she continued, "I wouldn't know where to start. It's been a week, and I still feel like I'm living in someone else's life." "You are," Darian said quietly, But that doesn't mean it can't become yours. How? By deciding what you want from it. Arya set down her fork. I want to go back to school. Then do it. Just like that? Just like that. I'll have Elena handle the paperwork. You can start next semester if you want. She stared at him. Why are you being so accommodating? Because I'm not your jailer, Arya. I'm your husband, and those are two very different things. Are they? Darian met her eyes. I'd like to think so. Arya picked up her wine glass and took a long drink. I don't understand you. What don't you understand? You're supposed to be this terrifying crime lord. Everyone in Valadoro acts like you're untouchable. But you sit here and let me insult you and ask for things and you just give them to me. Would you prefer I didn't? I'd prefer to know what you're getting out of this. Darian leaned back in his chair. Honestly, I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They finished dinner in silence. When Arya stood to leave, Darian stopped her. Arya, she turned. Thank you for having dinner with me. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. 2 weeks after the wedding, Arya's father called. She was in the library when her phone rang. Vincent's name lit up the screen. She stared at it for 3 rings before answering. What do you want? Arya. His voice sounded tired. I wanted to see how you're doing. How do you think I'm doing? I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Dad. I'm furious. There's a difference. Silence on the other end. I did what I had to do, Vincent said finally. You sold me. I saved you. Arya laughed bitterly. Is that what you tell yourself? You don't understand the situation I was in. Then explain it to me. Another pause. Then, I can't. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Arya closed her eyes. You know what the worst part is? I actually believed you cared about me. I thought all those years of you telling me I was smart, that I could do anything, that you were proud of me. I thought that meant something. It did mean something. Then why did you give me away? Vincent didn't answer. Arya hung up. She sat there staring at her phone, waiting to feel something other than empty. It didn't come. That night, she told Darian about the call. They were in his study. She'd knocked because she didn't know where else to go. He'd let her in without question. He wanted to know how I'm doing, she said, like he has any right to ask. Darian closed his laptop. What did you tell him? I told him I was furious. Then I hung up. Good. Arya looked at him. You think I should cut him off? I think you should do whatever you need to do to survive this. And if that means hating him, then hate him. She sank into the chair across from his desk. I don't want to hate him, but I don't know how to forgive him either. Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Catherine used to tell me that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you deciding not to carry the weight anymore. Sounds like she was wise. She was, but she also had the luxury of time. You don't have to figure this out right now. Arya rubbed her face. I feel like I'm drowning. I know. Does it get easier? Darian met her eyes. Eventually, but not quickly. She wanted to ask him how he'd survived losing Catherine, how he'd gone from 42 and in love to 65 and alone. But the question felt too big, too raw. Instead, she asked, Do you ever wish you could go back, change things? Every day. But wishing doesn't change the past. Then what does? Surviving it. They sat in silence until Arya finally stood to leave. Arya, Darian said. She turned. You're stronger than you think you are. She didn't believe him, but she appreciated the lie. Much. 3 weeks into the marriage, Arya started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Darian took his coffee. Black, no sugar, but he stirred it anyway like the motion itself mattered. How he read the newspaper every morning at exactly 6:30, always starting with the business section. The fact that he never raised his voice, even when the men who worked for him clearly deserved it. She noticed because she'd stopped avoiding him. It hadn't been a conscious decision, more like erosion. The hostility that had burned so bright in the cathedral had worn down to something duller. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, just exhaustion. And in the space that exhaustion created, curiosity crept in. She found herself eating breakfast in the small dining room instead of her bedroom, asking Elena which rooms Darian used most, staying up late enough that their kitchen encounters stopped feeling accidental. He never commented on it, never pushed, just made space for her the way you'd make space for a stray cat, patient, careful, expecting nothing. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it made her wonder what he was getting out of all this. On a Thursday morning, she found out. She was in the library looking for something to read when she heard voices coming from Darian's study. The door was cracked open. She knew she shouldn't listen. Did it anyway. Can't keep stalling, Darian. The Salvatores are asking questions. The voice belonged to a man Arya didn't recognize, that deep, rough around the edges. Darian's response was calm. Let them ask. They want to know why you married the Veil girl. They think you're making a play for her father's connections. What I do with my personal life is none of Marco Salvatore's concern. He's not going to see it that way. He's going to see it as you taking something he wanted. Silence. Then Darian said, Good. You're poking the bear. I'm drawing a line. There's a difference. The other man sighed. And when he crosses it, then we'll handle it. Footsteps. Arya moved away from the door just as a tall man in his 50s emerged. He glanced at her, nodded once, and kept walking. Darian appeared a moment later. He saw her standing there and knew immediately that she'd heard. How much did you catch? He asked. Enough to know the Salvatores aren't happy. He gestured for her to come inside. She did. Darian closed the door and leaned against his desk. Marco Salvatore had plans for you. When your father went to him for help, Marco saw an opportunity. Control the daughter, control the father, control his shipping routes. Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. And you ruined that by marrying me first. Yes. So I'm bait. You're protected, Darian corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Darian's jaw tightened. I won't apologize for keeping you out of Marco's hands. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out another folder, and handed it to her. Read it. Then decide if you still think I'm the villain here. Arya opened the folder. Inside were police reports, hospital records, and photographs that made her stomach turn. Women with broken bones. Burn marks. Worse things she didn't have words for. These are all connected to Marco Salvatore? She asked quietly. Those are the ones who survived long enough to file reports. Most don't. Arya closed the folder. Her hands were shaking. Your father knew, Darian said. He knew exactly what kind of man Marco is, and he still went to him for help. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth, all of it. Arya set the folder on the desk and wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. You don't have to do anything. Just know that as long as you're my wife, Marco can't touch you. And when he stops caring about that, then I'll make sure he regrets it. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded Arya that she'd married a man capable of violence she couldn't imagine. She left the study without another word. That night, Arya couldn't sleep again. But this time, instead of going to the kitchen, she went to Darian's room. She knocked before she could talk herself out of it. Come in. He was sitting in a chair by the window, reading. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. I need to ask you something, Arya said. Darian set down his book. All right. Have you ever killed anyone? He didn't flinch, didn't look away. Yes. How many? I stopped counting a long time ago. Arya should have been terrified, should have turned around and walked out. Instead, she sat on the edge of his bed. Does it bother you? She asked. Every day? Then why do it? Darian was quiet for a moment. Because in my world, hesitation gets you killed. And I decided a long time ago that I'd rather live with guilt than die with clean hands. That's a terrible way to live. Yes, it is. She looked at him. Really looked at him. He didn't seem like a monster. He seemed tired, like a man who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Catherine knew, didn't she? Arya said. What you did. She knew. And she still loved you? She loved who I was when I was with her. The rest of it, He shrugged. She found a way to live with it. How? By reminding me I was more than the worst things I'd done. Arya pulled her knees up to her chest. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Live with you, hate my father, be angry and grateful at the same time. It's exhausting. Darian stood and walked to his dresser. He pulled out a small wooden box and brought it back to where Arya sat, opened it. Inside was a handkerchief, white linen, embroidered with the initials CV. Catherine gave this to me on our wedding day, he said. Told me I'd need it for all the times I cried at sappy movies. Did you? Once. We watched The Notebook, and I cried like a child. She never let me live it down. Arya almost smiled. Why are you showing me this? Because you asked how she lived with me. This is how. She saw the parts of me I kept hidden and refused to let me pretend they didn't exist. He held out the handkerchief. Arya stared at it. I can't take that. It was hers. I'm not giving it to you. I'm lending it to you for when things feel impossible. She took it carefully. The fabric was soft, worn from years of being held. Thank you, she whispered. Darian nodded and returned the box to the dresser. You should get some rest. Arya stood to leave, then paused at the door. Darian? Yes? I'm not going to fall in love with you. He almost smiled. You already told me that. I know. I just wanted to make sure you still knew. Understood. She left him there by the window and went back to her room. That night, for the first time since the wedding, she slept without waking. The next morning, Arya found Elena in the greenhouse. The older woman was repotting orchids, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She looked up when Arya entered. Can I help you with something, Mrs. Viscari? Stop calling me that. Elena raised an eyebrow. What would you prefer? Arya. Just Arya. As you wish. Arya wandered through the rows of plants. Everything was meticulously labeled, organized, perfect. How long have you worked for Darian? She asked. 17 years? You knew Catherine then. Elena's hand stilled for just a moment. I did. What was she like? The older woman resumed her repotting. She was kind, strong, stubborn when she needed to be. Did she love him? Very much. Even knowing what he did? Elena looked at Arya. Mrs. Arya. Mr. Viscari is not a simple man, but he is not a cruel one either. Catherine understood that. She saw the difference. And you? Do you see the difference? I see a man who has never once raised his voice to his staff, who pays us well, treats us fairly, and asks nothing unreasonable. What he does outside these walls is not my concern. Arya picked up a watering can and started helping with the plants. You think I'm being unfair to him? I think you're being honest. There's nothing unfair about that. They worked in silence for a while. Then Elena said, He talks about you, you know. Arya looked up. What does he say? That you're braver than you realize, that you challenge him in ways he didn't expect. He said that? Not in those exact words, but I've known him long enough to read between the lines. Arya set down the watering can. I don't know how to be married to him. Then don't be married to him. Just be yourself. The rest will sort itself out. You make it sound simple. Elena smiled. I didn't say it was simple. I said it would sort itself out. Those are two different things. But it is. A month after the wedding, Darian asked Arya to accompany him to a business dinner. You don't have to, he said, but people are starting to talk about why my wife never appears in public. What kind of talk? The kind that suggests I'm keeping you locked up. Arya laughed bitterly. Aren't you? No, you're free to leave whenever you want. You just choose not to. She couldn't argue with that. Who's going to be there? Business associates, a few city officials, Marco Salvatore. That got her attention. You want me to meet the man who wanted to own me? I want him to see that you're off limits. There's a difference. And if I say no, then I'll go alone and the rumors will continue. Arya thought about it. Part of her wanted to refuse out of spite, but another part, the part that had been quietly growing stronger over the past month, was curious. She wanted to see Darian in his element, wanted to understand the world he lived in. Fine, she said. But I'm not wearing anything ridiculous. Wear whatever you want. 2 days later, Arya found herself standing in front of her closet trying to decide what you wear to dinner with criminals. She settled on a black dress. Simple, elegant, the kind of thing that said she belonged without trying too hard. When she came downstairs, Darian was waiting in the foyer. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her college tuition. He looked up when she appeared and something shifted in his expression. "You look beautiful," he said. Don't. Don't what? Don't pretend this is a real marriage." "I'm not pretending. I'm stating a fact." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just walked past him to the car. The drive to the restaurant took 20 minutes. Darian spent most of it on his phone, speaking in low tones about shipping schedules and delivery routes. Arya stared out the window and tried not to think about what she was walking into. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. Private booths, low lighting, waiters who moved like ghosts. Darian placed his hand on the small of Arya's back as they walked in, not possessive, just guiding, and she didn't pull away. They were led to a private room in the back where a long table had been set for 12 people. Arya recognized a few faces from the wedding. Others were strangers, and at the far end of the table sat a man who could only be Marco Salvatore. He was younger than Darian, maybe late 50s, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that tracked Arya like a hawk watching prey. Darian pulled out a chair for her. She sat. He took the seat beside her, positioning himself between Arya and Marco. "Darian," Marco said, his voice smooth as silk. "So good of you to join us." "Marco. And this must be your lovely bride." Marco's gaze slid to Arya. "We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Marco Salvatore." "Arya Vale," she said, deliberately using her maiden name. Marco smiled. "Viscari now, isn't it?" "On paper." The table went quiet. Darian's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. Marco leaned back in his chair. "Your father speaks highly of you." "My father doesn't know me as well as he thinks." "Clearly, I wouldn't have thought Vincent Vale's daughter would be so direct." "Disappointment runs in the family." Someone at the table coughed. Marco's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I like her," he said to Darian. "She's got fire." "She's also my wife," Darian said quietly, "which means she's off limits to commentary." The temperature in this room dropped 10 degrees. Marco raised his hands in mock surrender. "Of course. My apologies." Dinner was served. Arya barely tasted any of it. She was too focused on the undercurrent of tension running through every conversation. The men at the table talked about imports and exports, tariffs and unions, all of it coded language for things Arya didn't fully understand. But she understood enough to know that every word was a negotiation, every pause a test. Halfway through the meal, Marco turned to her again. "Tell me, Arya, how are you finding married life?" "Educational. I imagine it must be quite an adjustment, going from student to the wife of Valadoro's most powerful man." "I was a student when I got married. I'm still a student now. That hasn't changed." Marco looked at Darian. "You're letting her continue her education? She's an adult. She doesn't need my permission." "How progressive of you." Arya set down her fork. "Is there something you'd like to say to me directly, Mr. Salvatore? Or are you going to keep talking about me like I'm not here?" The table went completely silent. Marco studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You've got yourself a handful, Darian. I hope you're prepared for it." "I am." "Good, because in my experience, women with opinions tend to cause problems." Arya leaned forward. "In my experience, men who are threatened by women with opinions tend to be the problem." Darian's hand tightened on hers. Not a warning this time. Support. Marco's smile vanished. "You should teach your wife some manners." "My wife has excellent manners," Darian said. "She just chooses not to waste them on people who don't deserve them." The two men stared at each other across the table. Arya could feel the violence simmering beneath the surface. One wrong word, and this whole thing would explode. Then Darian stood. "I think we're done here." He pulled out Arya's chair. She stood. They walked out of the restaurant together while 12 pairs of eyes watched them go. In the car, Arya's hands were shaking. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. I made things worse. You stood up for yourself. That's not making things worse. Marco looked like he wanted to kill me. Darian glanced at her. Marco always looks like that. It's his default expression. This isn't funny. I know. He took her hand. But you were magnificent in there. Arya looked at their joined hands. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? Because I embarrassed you in front of your associates. You didn't embarrass me. You reminded every man at that table that my wife is not someone to be underestimated. That's the opposite of embarrassing. She didn't know what to say to that. They drove in silence for a while. Then Arya asked, What happens now? Now Marco knows he can't intimidate you, and that makes you dangerous. I'm not dangerous. Darian looked at her. You're more dangerous than you realize. The next week, things changed. It started small. Darian began asking her opinion on things, what she thought about a business proposal, whether she'd read an article in the morning paper. Nothing important, just conversation. Then he started having dinner with her every night, not in the formal dining room, in the small one off the kitchen, just the two of them. Then he started telling her stories. About Catherine, about his childhood in Valedoro, about the first time he realized he'd built an empire and had no one to share it with. And Arya found herself listening, not because she had to, because she wanted to. She started asking questions about his business, about the people he worked with, about the fine line he walked between legal and illegal. He answered honestly, sometimes too honestly. He told her about the bribes, the threats, the times he'd had to make choices that kept him up at night. He didn't try to justify it, didn't make excuses, just laid it out and let her decide what to do with it. And slowly, without either of them quite realizing it, they stopped being strangers who happened to share a last name and started being something else. Not friends, not lovers. Something in between that neither of them had a name for. One night, 2 months after the wedding, they were sitting in the library. Darian was reading. Arya was pretending to read, but mostly watching him. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Why haven't you tried to kiss me? Darian looked up from his book. Because you haven't asked me to. Most men wouldn't wait for permission. I'm not most men. No, you're not. She set down her book and crossed the room, sat on the arm of his chair. He watched her, completely still. What would you do if I did ask? She said. I'd ask if you were sure. And if I said yes, then I'd kiss you. Arya studied his face, the silver hair, the lines around his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. I'm not ready, she said quietly. I know. But I might be, someday. I'll be here when you are. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. It was just acknowledgement of what they'd become, of what they might become. When she pulled back, Darian's eyes were closed. Thank you, he whispered. Arya went to bed that night and realized she'd stopped thinking about leaving. The call came 3 days later. Arya was in the greenhouse with Elena when Darian burst through the door. She'd never seen him move that fast. We need to go, now. What's wrong? Your father's been arrested. Everything else fell away. What? Why? The police found evidence linking him to the Salvatores, money laundering, fraud, enough to put him away for 20 years. Arya's legs went weak. Elena caught her before she fell. That's not possible, Arya said. He wouldn't. He did. And now he's in custody and Marco is circling like a shark. What does that mean? Darian's expression was grim. It means Marco set him up, and he's going to use your father's arrest to come after you. Why would he do that? Because you humiliated him at that dinner, and because taking you from me would be the ultimate insult. Arya felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. What do we do? I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She looked at him, at the man who had given her space to hate him, time to heal, and protection when she didn't know she needed it. Yes. Good. Then pack a bag. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Where are we going? Somewhere Marco can't find you. Elena squeezed her shoulder. Go. I'll have Thomas bring the car around. Arya ran to her room and threw clothes into a bag without thinking. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip it closed. When she came back downstairs, Darian was waiting with a phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "I want every piece of evidence against Vincent Vale on my desk by tonight." He hung up and saw Arya. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." They got in the car. Thomas drove while Darian made call after call, his voice cold and precise as he gave orders to people Arya couldn't see. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Getting your father out." "Why?" "After everything he did?" "Because he's your father, and because I promised to protect you. That includes protecting the people you love, even when they don't deserve it." Arya felt something crack open in her chest. They drove for an hour before pulling up to a house Arya didn't recognize. It was smaller than the estate. Quieter. Hidden behind trees at the end of a long driveway. "This is one of my safe houses," Darian said. "No one knows about it except me and a few people I trust. How long do we have to stay here?" "Until I can neutralize the threat." "And if you can't?" He looked at her. "I will." They went inside. The house was furnished but impersonal, like a hotel room that happened to have a kitchen. Darian made more calls. Arya sat on the couch and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. When he finally hung up, she asked, "Is my father okay?" "He's alive. That's all I know right now." "What did Marco do to him?" "Planted evidence, paid off witnesses, made it look like your father was running a full-scale operation out of Marco's territory." "Why frame him? Why not just kill him?" "Because killing him would be too quick. Marco wants him to suffer, and he wants you to watch." Arya wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't understand any of this." Darian sat beside her. "Marco is making a statement. He's showing everyone in Valadoro that crossing him has consequences. And I'm part of those consequences. You were supposed to be, but he didn't count on you being my wife." "What difference does that make?" "It makes all the difference, because now attacking you means attacking me, and Marco knows that's a war he can't win." Arya looked at him. "You're that powerful?" "I'm that committed." Something in the way he said it made her believe him. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Arya said, "Tell me the truth. Is my father going to prison?" "Not if I can help it." "But he's guilty." "Probably." "Then why save him?" Darian met her eyes. "Because you asked me to trust you earlier. Now I'm asking you to trust me. Can you do that?" Arya thought about the last 2 months. About the conversations in the kitchen, the dinner where she'd stood up to Marco, the way Darian had looked at her like she mattered. "Yes," she said. "I can." He nodded. "Then let me handle this." That night, Arya lay in a strange bed in a strange house and realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing Darian as her captor. She wasn't sure what she saw him as now, but it wasn't that. And that terrified her more than anything Marco Salvatore could do. The first 48 hours at the safe house felt like living in suspended animation. Darian barely slept. He spent most of his time on the phone or hunched over his laptop, coordinating moves Arya couldn't see. She heard fragments, names she didn't recognize, locations that meant nothing to her, threats delivered in tones so calm they were more frightening than shouting. She tried to stay out of his way, made coffee, stared out windows, checked her phone obsessively for news about her father, and found nothing. The silence was worse than any headline could have been. On the second night, she found Darian standing on the back porch at 3 a.m. He didn't turn when she stepped outside. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." "I will. When this is over." Arya leaned against the railing beside him. The night was cold enough that she could see her breath. "Have you heard anything about my father?" "He's still in custody, but I've got lawyers working on getting him out." "And Marco?" "Quiet. Too quiet." "That's bad, isn't it?" Darian nodded. "When Marco goes silent, it means he's planning something." "What do you think he's going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I will." Arya pulled her sweater tighter around herself. "You're scaring me." He finally looked at her. "Good. You should be scared. Fear keeps you careful." "I don't want to be careful. I want to know what's happening." "What's happening is I'm trying to keep you alive while simultaneously dismantling everything Marco has spent the last decade building. It's delicate work." "How delicate?" "One wrong move and people die." The bluntness of it hit her like cold water. People like my father? People like everyone. She wrapped her arms around herself. I hate this. I hate not knowing. I hate sitting here while you handle everything. I hate feeling useless. Darian turned to face her fully. You're not useless. You're protected. There's a difference. Protected feels a lot like useless from where I'm standing. Then tell me what you need. I need you to be honest with me about all of it. No more protecting me from the truth. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, Come inside. I'll show you everything. They went back into the house. Darian opened his laptop and turned it so Arya could see the screen. It was filled with documents, spreadsheets, photographs. This is what I've been working on, he said. Marco's entire operation, every business he runs, every person he owns, every piece of leverage he has. I've been mapping it for years. Arya scrolled through the files. Why? Because the only way to beat someone like Marco is to know him better than he knows himself. And you think you do? I know he's arrogant, impatient, and he underestimates people who aren't like him. People like you? People like you. Arya looked up. What does that mean? Darian pointed to one of the files. Marco thinks women are weak, decorative, useful only as leverage. It's why he wanted you in the first place. He thought controlling you would give him control over your father, and through your father, access to shipping routes I've been blocking him from for years. But you married me first. Yes, which should have ended it. But Marco doesn't like losing. So instead of walking away, he decided to destroy your father and take you anyway. How does framing my father help him take me? Because if your father goes to prison, you lose the one connection you have left to your old life. You become isolated, vulnerable, and Marco thinks that's when I'll make a mistake trying to protect you. Arya felt something click into place. He's using my father as bait. Yes, to draw you out. Yes. So what do we do? Darian closed the laptop. We give him what he wants. You want to walk into a trap? I want him to think I'm walking into a trap. There's a difference. Arya shook her head. I don't understand. Marco expects me to react emotionally, to do something reckless to save your father. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something he won't expect. Which is, I'm going to destroy him systematically, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. The coldness in his voice made Arya shiver. How long will that take? 2 weeks, maybe less. And my father? Will be out of custody in 3 days. How can you be so sure? Darian looked at her. Because I've already bought the judge, intimidated the witnesses, and made it very clear to the district attorney that pursuing this case would be bad for his career. Arya didn't know whether to be relieved or horrified. That's corruption. Yes. It's illegal. Yes. And you're just telling me this? You asked for honesty. This is what honesty looks like in my world. She wanted to be angry, wanted to tell him that this was wrong, that you couldn't just buy justice like it was something off a shelf. But the truth was, if it got her father out of prison, she didn't care how corrupt it was. And that realization terrified her more than anything else. What happens after you get him out? She asked quietly. Then the real work begins. Fog. 3 days later, Vincent Vale walked out of police custody a free man. Arya watched it happen on the news. Her father emerged from the courthouse looking smaller than she remembered. Older. He made a brief statement about being innocent, about how justice had prevailed, about how he looked forward to rebuilding his life. He didn't mention the daughter who'd been sold to make his problems disappear. Arya turned off the television. Darian had been watching from the doorway. Do you want to see him? No. Are you sure? I'm sure. He nodded and went back to his laptop. Arya stayed on the couch and tried to figure out what she was supposed to feel. Relief that her father was free? Anger that he'd put them all in this position? Something else entirely? She settled on numb. That night, her father called. Arya stared at her phone for 5 rings before answering. Arya. His voice sounded raw. Thank you. For what? For whatever you did. Whatever you said to him. I know Darian got me out. I didn't do anything. That was all him. Silence on the other end. Then, I need to see you. No. Arya, please. You sold me, Dad. You handed me over to a stranger and told yourself it was for my own good. I don't owe you anything. I know. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand. I understand perfectly. You were in trouble and you used me as currency. There's nothing complicated about it. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain it to me. Make me understand how selling your daughter to a man 42 years older than her was anything other than the worst thing you've ever done. Vincent's breath came in short bursts. I thought he would protect you. From what? From you? From Marco. From men like Marco. I knew what they wanted to do with you and I couldn't stop them, but Darian could, so I made a choice. You made a choice that wasn't yours to make. I'm your father. You stopped being my father the day you signed that contract. She hung up before he could respond. Darian appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't offer empty comfort, just sat beside her and waited. I don't know if I'll ever forgive him, Arya said. You don't have to. But he's my father. That doesn't mean he's entitled to your forgiveness. She looked at him. Do you forgive people who hurt you? Rarely. Why not? Because forgiveness requires trust, and once someone breaks my trust, they don't get it back. That sounds lonely. It is, but it's also safe. Arya leaned her head on his shoulder. It surprised both of them, but he didn't pull away, and neither did she. Thank you, she said quietly, for getting him out. You already thanked me. I know, but I mean it this time. His arm came around her shoulders, carefully, like he was still expecting her to bolt. She didn't. They sat like that for a long time, and Arya realized that somewhere in the last 2 months, Darian had stopped being the enemy. She wasn't sure what he was now, but it wasn't that. The next week, Darian started making his moves. It began with shipping contracts. 3 of Marco's biggest clients suddenly canceled their agreements and signed with Darian instead. Then 2 of Marco's warehouses failed safety inspections and were shut down pending further review. Then one of his most trusted lieutenants was arrested for tax evasion. Arya watched it happen with a kind of horrified fascination. Darian moved like a chess player who'd been planning his strategy for years. Every action was calculated, every consequence anticipated. Nothing was left to chance. How are you doing this? She asked one night. They were back at the estate. Darian had decided it was safe enough to return. Arya wasn't sure she believed him, but she was tired of the safe house. Doing what? He asked without looking up from his laptop. Taking apart Marco's empire like it's made of tissue paper. It's not made of tissue paper. It's made of fear and money. Take away one, and the other follows. And you're taking away both. Yes. How long before he retaliates? He already is, or trying to, but he's discovering that most of his allies were only loyal as long as he was winning. Arya sat across from him. You really are going to destroy him, aren't you? I told you I would. I didn't believe you. Darian finally looked up. You should start believing me. Why? Because I don't make promises I can't keep. There was something in his eyes when he said it, something that made Arya's chest tighten. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the ocean stretched dark and endless under a moonless sky. What happens when this is over? What do you want to happen? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Neither have I. She turned to face him. Liar? He almost smiled. All right. Yes, I've thought about it. And? And I think you should go back to school. Finish your degree. Build the life you were supposed to have before all of this. What about you? I'll still be here. That's not what I meant. Darian closed his laptop. Then what did you mean? Arya crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk. I meant what happens to us. That depends on what you want. I'm asking what you want. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want you to choose me, not because you have to, not because you're scared or grateful or obligated, but because you actually want to. And if I don't, then I'll let you go. Just like that? Just like that. Arya studied his face, the silver hair, the lines around his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. You're making this very difficult, she said. Good. You've been making it difficult for me since the moment you slapped me at the altar. She almost laughed. I can't believe I did that. I can. It was the most honest thing either of us did that day. Do you ever wish I hadn't? Not even once. Arya reached out and touched his face. He went completely still. I'm still not going to fall in love with you. You keep saying that because I need you to know. I know. Do you? He caught her hand and held it against his cheek. Yes, but I'm also patient enough to wait until you change your mind. What makes you think I will? Because you're sitting on my desk at midnight touching my face instead of being anywhere else. She pulled her hand back. That doesn't mean anything. If you say so. I'm serious. So am I. She wanted to argue. To tell him he was wrong, that this was just proximity and circumstance and the strange intimacy that comes from surviving something together, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined. No fireworks, no sweeping romance, just his mouth on hers, warm and gentle and patient. He let her control it, didn't push, didn't demand, just gave her exactly as much as she was willing to take. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. What was that for? He asked. I don't know. Are you going to do it again? I don't know that either. He smiled, actually smiled. Fair enough. She slid off the desk and headed for the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Darian? Yes? Thank you for not making this complicated. It's already complicated. I'm just trying not to make it worse. She left him there and went to bed. That night, she dreamed of oceans and storms and silver-haired men who looked at her like she was worth saving. 2 days later, Marco made his move. Arya was in the library when she heard shouting. She ran downstairs to find Darian in the foyer with 3 men she didn't recognize. They looked like they'd been in a fight. One of them was bleeding. What happened? She asked. Darian turned. His expression was ice. Marco hit one of our shipments, took the cargo, and left a message. What kind of message? He handed her a piece of paper. The words were simple, direct. You took something that belongs to me. I'm taking it back. Arya looked up. He's talking about me. Yes. What are you going to do? End this. The coldness in his voice made her shiver. She'd seen Darian angry before. This was different. This was controlled fury. He turned to the men. Get everyone together. We move tonight. They left. Darian started walking toward his study. Arya followed. What's the plan? She asked. You're staying here with Thomas and 2 armed guards. I'm going to have a conversation with Marco. You mean you're going to kill him? Darian stopped, turned to face her. If it comes to that, yes. Don't. Arya, I'm serious. Don't kill him because of me. I'm not worth it. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her face in his hands. You are worth it. You're worth everything, and I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let him touch you. That's insane. Maybe, but it's also true. She grabbed his wrists. Promise me you won't do anything stupid. I promise I'll do what needs to be done. That's not the same thing. It's the best I can offer. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that risking his life for her was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard, but she could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. When are you leaving? She asked. An hour? Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that. I'm your husband. I get to decide exactly that. Being my husband doesn't make you my owner. No, but it makes me responsible for keeping you alive. Arya pulled away from him. I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. I can handle myself. Against Marco Salvatore? You can't. Then teach me. Show me what to do. But don't lock me in this house and expect me to just wait around hoping you come back alive. Darian ran a hand through his hair. This is non-negotiable. So is my involvement. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Darian said, If you come with me, you follow my orders. No arguments, no exceptions. Fine. I'm serious, Arya. One wrong move and people die. I understand. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Get changed into something dark. And stay close to me. They left the estate as the sun was setting. 4 cars, 12 men. And Arya, sitting in the back seat beside Darian, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Marco's warehouse on the south side. He'll be there tonight conducting business." "How do you know?" "Because I've had people watching him for 2 weeks. I know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to, and exactly when he's most vulnerable." "And that's tonight?" "Yes." The drive took 30 minutes. They pulled up to a warehouse district that looked abandoned. Darian's men spread out, taking positions around the building. Darian and Arya approached the front entrance with 2 guards flanking them. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty, except for shipping containers stacked along the walls. And in the center, sitting at a folding table like he'd been waiting for them, was Marco Salvatore. He wasn't alone. 6 men stood behind him, all of them armed. Marco smiled when he saw them. "Darian! And you brought your lovely wife. How thoughtful." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Darian said. You wanted a conversation. Here I am." "Actually, I wanted a war, but this will do." "You can't win a war against me, Marco. You don't have the resources." "Maybe not, but I have something you want." Marco gestured to one of his men who dragged someone forward. Arya's breath caught. It was her father. Vincent looked terrible, bruised, bloody, barely conscious. They threw him on the ground at Marco's feet. "Dad!" Arya started forward. Darian's hand caught her arm. "Don't," he said quietly. Marco stood. "Here's how this works. You give me everything you've taken from me over the past 2 weeks. Every contract, every warehouse, every piece of my operation that you've been systematically destroying. And in exchange, I give you Vincent Vale, alive." "And if I refuse?" Darian asked. "Then I kill him right here, right now, and your wife gets to watch." Arya looked at her father, at the man who'd sold her, betrayed her, and destroyed any chance they had at a normal relationship. And she realized something. She didn't want him to die. "Do it," she said to Darian. "Give him what he wants." Darian looked at her. "Arya, he's my father. I can't just let him die. Even after everything he's done. Even after everything." Darian turned back to Marco. "You want a deal? Fine. But not the one you're offering." Marco raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "You release Vincent, unharmed, and you leave Valedoro, permanently." "And what do I get in return?" "Your life." Marco laughed. "You're not in a position to threaten me." "No, but I'm in a position to destroy you, which is exactly what I'll do if you don't take this deal." "You're bluffing." Darian pulled out his phone, showed Marco the screen. "These are warrants for your arrest, tax evasion, racketeering, murder. I've had federal investigators building a case against you for months. One phone call and they're executed." Marco's smile faltered. "You're lying." "Am I? Test me." The warehouse went silent. Arya could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Finally, Marco said, "Even if that's true, killing me would make you just as guilty." "I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to let the justice system do it for me, unless you take my offer and disappear." Marco looked at Vincent, then at Arya, then at Darian. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." Marco gestured to his men. They pulled Vincent to his feet and shoved him toward Darian. Arya ran forward and caught her father before he fell. "Dad, are you okay?" Vincent looked at her through swollen eyes. "Arya, I'm sorry for everything." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just helped him stand. Darian hadn't moved. He was still staring at Marco. "You have 24 hours. After that, the warrants go out." "You think you've won," Marco said. "But all you've done is make an enemy." "I've had enemies before. They don't last long." Marco left. His men followed. Within minutes, the warehouse was empty except for Darian, Arya, Vincent, and their guards. Darian turned to one of his men. "Get Vincent to a hospital. Make sure he's treated." "Yes, sir." They took Vincent away. Arya watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she said to Darian. "Don't thank me. I did it for you, not him." "I know, but thank you anyway." He took her hand. "Let's go home." They drove back in silence. Arya kept replaying the confrontation in her head. The way Darian had stood there, completely calm, while Marco postured and threatened. The way he'd given her father back without hesitation, even though Vincent had caused all of this. When they got back to the estate, Arya followed Darian to his study. "I need to tell you something," she said. He turned. "What?" "I lied earlier when I said I wasn't going to fall in love with you." "Arya, let me finish. I'm not in love with you, not yet, but I'm not in love with you either, and that scares me more than anything Marco could have done." Darian crossed the room, stopped inches from her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I choose you, not because I'm scared or grateful or have no other options, but because when I look at you, I see someone who sees me, really sees me, and I've never had that before." He cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure I want to try." He kissed her. And this time, when she kissed him back, it felt like choosing, like deciding, like the first honest thing she'd done since walking down that aisle 2 months ago. When they pulled apart, Darian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I've loved you since you slapped me at the altar and refused to pretend this was anything other than what it was." "That's insane." "Probably, but it's also true." Arya laughed. Actually laughed. "We're a mess." "Yes, but we're our mess." She kissed him again, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, Arya woke up in Darian's bed. Not because anything had happened, just because after the kiss, after the confession, neither of them had wanted to be alone. So they'd fallen asleep side by side, fully clothed, like two people who'd forgotten how to be strangers but hadn't quite figured out how to be anything else. She turned over and found him already awake, watching her. "How long have you been staring at me?" she asked. "Long enough to confirm you drool in your sleep." She hit him with a pillow. "I do not." "You absolutely do. It's actually kind of charming." "Nothing about drooling is charming." He caught the pillow before she could hit him again. "Are you always this violent in the morning?" "Only when I'm being lied to about my sleeping habits." He laughed. Actually laughed. It was a sound Arya had only heard a handful of times, and every time it surprised her. "What?" he asked, seeing her expression. "Nothing. I just like that sound." "What sound?" "You laughing. You should do it more." He pulled her closer. "Give me more reasons to, and I will." She settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was steady, reliable, the kind of rhythm you could build a life around if you were brave enough to try. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we get up, have breakfast, and pretend we know what we're doing." "I was hoping for something more profound." "Profound comes later. Right now I just want coffee." They got up. Arya borrowed one of Darian's shirts because the idea of going back to her room felt like backtracking. He watched her button it with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. You just look good in my clothes." "Don't get used to it." Too late. They went downstairs together. Elena was already in the kitchen, setting out breakfast like she'd known they'd both be there. She took one look at them and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Viscari." "Mr. Viscari." "Just Arya. Elena. Please." "As you wish." They sat at the small table. Darian poured coffee while Arya checked her phone. There were 17 missed calls from her father. She turned the phone face down. "You're going to have to talk to him eventually," Darian said. "I know, but not today." "Fair enough." Elena set plates in front of them. Eggs, toast, fruit, normal things that felt surreal after everything that had happened. "Has anyone heard from Marco?" Arya asked. Darian nodded. "He left Valadoro last night. Took a private jet to somewhere in South America." "You're sure he's gone?" "I'm sure he's smart enough to know I wasn't bluffing about those warrants. And if he comes back, then I'll deal with it. But I don't think he will. Marco's many things, but he's not stupid. He knows when he's lost." Arya pushed eggs around her plate. "I still can't believe you did all of that in 2 weeks." "I had motivation." "Me?" "You." She looked at him. "That's a lot of pressure. You didn't ask for it. I'm just telling you the truth." "The truth is complicated." "Most true things are." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Then Darian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I need to take this. He stepped into his study. Arya could hear his voice through the door, low and clipped. When he came back 15 minutes later, his expression was grim. What's wrong? She asked. Your father wants to see you. I already told you I'm not ready. He's in the hospital, Arya. He's asking for you. Something in her chest tightened. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but the doctors say he's in bad shape emotionally. He won't talk to anyone except you. Arya stood and walked to the window. Outside, the ocean was gray and choppy. Storm weather. I don't know what to say to him, she said. Then don't say anything. Just listen. What if I can't forgive him? Then you can't. But at least you'll have tried. She turned to face Darian. Will you come with me? Do you want me to? Yes. Then I will. The hospital was 20 minutes from the estate. Arya spent the entire drive staring out the window, rehearsing conversations that would never happen. What do you say to the man who sold you? How do you look at your father and not see the person who decided you were worth less than his own safety? Darian held her hand the whole way. Didn't offer advice. Didn't tell her what to feel. Just sat beside her and let her work through it. Vincent was in a private room on the 4th floor. The guard outside nodded at Darian and let them through. Inside, her father looked worse than he had at the warehouse. The bruises had darkened. His left eye was swollen shut. An IV ran into his arm. He looked up when they entered. Arya. She stopped just inside the door. Dad. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. Vincent looked at Darian. Can we have a moment alone? No, Arya said before Darian could respond. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of him. He's my husband. He's earned that right. Her father's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Arya pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. Darian stayed by the door, giving them space but not leaving. The doctors say you're going to be fine, Arya said. Physically, yes. Everything else, Vincent shook his head. I don't know how to fix it. Fix what? Us. What I did to you, the choice I made. Arya crossed her arms. You can't fix it. I know, but I need you to understand why I did it. I already know why. You were scared, you owed money to bad people, and when Marco offered you a way out, you took it. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me. Vincent closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Your mother was sick 2 years ago. Cancer. She didn't want anyone to know, so we kept it quiet. But the treatments were expensive, insurance didn't cover half of it. I started borrowing money wherever I could. Arya felt the ground shift beneath her. Mom was sick? Is sick. She's in remission now, but it could come back. The doctor said we needed to be prepared. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were in school. You were building a life. We didn't want to burden you. So instead you sold me? I thought I was protecting you. Marco said if I helped him, he'd clear my debts and leave us alone. But then he started asking questions about you, about your routines, where you went to school, who your friends were. And I realized he didn't want my help. He wanted leverage. So you went to Darian. Vincent nodded. I knew Darian's reputation. I knew he was powerful enough to stand up to Marco, so I made him an offer. Me. You offered him me. I offered him a partnership. The marriage was his idea. Arya looked at Darian. He met her gaze but didn't speak. Why didn't you just ask me for help? She asked her father. Because you were 23 years old. You shouldn't have to save your parents. But I should have to marry a stranger? I thought... Vincent's voice broke. I thought it would be better than the alternative. The alternative being Marco. Yes. Arya stood and walked to the window. Below, people moved through the parking lot like ants. Normal people with normal problems. She envied them. I can't forgive you, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I understand why you did it, and I'm glad Mom's okay. She wants to see you. I'll think about it. Arya, that's all I can give you right now, Dad. Take it or leave it. Vincent nodded. I'll take it. She turned to Darian. Can we go? Of course. They left the hospital in silence. In the car, Arya stared at her hands and tried to process everything her father had told her. Did you know? She asked. About my mother? Yes. How long? Since before I agreed to the marriage. She looked at him. And you didn't tell me. It wasn't my truth to tell. It was your father's. You should have told me anyway. Maybe. But I made a promise to him that I wouldn't, and I keep my promises. Arya wanted to be angry, wanted to tell him that keeping her in the dark was just another form of control, but she could see in his eyes that he'd struggled with the decision, that it had cost him something to stay silent. I hate this, she said. I know. I hate that everyone in my life has been making decisions for me like I'm not capable of making them myself. You're right, and I'm sorry for my part in that. She leaned her head back against the seat. My mother's sick. Yes. And you've known this whole time. Yes. What else do you know that you haven't told me? Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your father's debts weren't just medical bills. He was gambling, badly. He lost over $2 million in the last 3 years. Arya closed her eyes. Of course he was. He's also been siphoning money from your mother's family trust to cover it. That's why Marco had leverage. He knew about the trust. How do you know all of this? Because I make it my business to know everything about the people I deal with. Even me? Especially you. She opened her eyes and looked at him. What did you find out about me? That you were top of your class. That you wanted to be a journalist. That you spent every Saturday volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. That you had a professor who told you you were wasting your talent and you told him to go to hell. Despite everything, Arya almost smiled. Professor Morrison, he was an ass. You were right to tell him off. You really looked into all of that? I wanted to know who you were before I agreed to marry you. And what did you decide? That you were worth protecting. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they got back to the estate, Arya went straight to the library and called her mother. Margaret answered on the third ring. Arya? Dad told me about the cancer, about everything. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to tell you myself. Why didn't you? Because I was ashamed of being sick, of your father's choices, of all of it. You don't get to be ashamed of being sick, Mom. That's not how it works. I know, but I felt like I'd failed you. Failed both of you. Arya's throat tightened. You didn't fail me. Dad did. There's a difference. He was trying to help. He was trying to save himself, and he used me to do it. Margaret didn't argue. Are you happy with Darian? The question caught Arya off guard. I don't know, maybe. It's complicated. Marriage always is. Not like this. No, not like this. But you're handling it better than I would have. You don't know that. Yes, I do. You're stronger than me, Arya. You always have been. They talked for another 20 minutes. About treatment, about remission, about the small things that make up a life when the big things are too heavy to carry. When Arya hung up, she found Darian in the doorway. How long have you been standing there? She asked. Long enough. That's becoming a habit with you. So is you not noticing me? She stood and crossed to him. I want to see her. My mother. Can you arrange it? Of course. When? Tomorrow. Before I change my mind. I'll have Thomas drive you. Will you come with me? He studied her face. Do you want me to? I'm not sure, but I think I might need you there. Then I'll be there. The next day they drove to the small house where Arya had grown up. It looked smaller than she remembered, sadder, like the years had worn it down the way they'd worn down her mother. Margaret was waiting on the porch. She looked thinner than Arya remembered, frailer, but when she smiled, it was the same smile Arya had grown up with. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. They hugged. Arya held on longer than she meant to, and her mother didn't let go. When they pulled apart, Margaret looked at Darian. Thank you for bringing her. She brought herself. I just drove. They went inside. The house smelled like coffee and old books. Margaret had made lunch, sandwiches and soup, nothing fancy, and they sat at the kitchen table like they were normal people living normal lives. How are you feeling? Arya asked. Tired, but better than I was. Dad said you're in remission. For now, we'll know more in 6 months. And if it comes back, then we'll deal with it. But I'm not thinking that far ahead anymore. It's too exhausting. They talked about small things, about the garden Margaret was planting, about a book she'd just finished, about everything except the massive elephant in the room. Finally, Arya asked, "Did you know what Dad was planning? With me and Darian?" Margaret set down her soup spoon. "Not at first, but I found out a week before the wedding. And you didn't stop it." "I tried. I told him it was wrong, that you deserved better, but he said it was the only way to keep you safe." From Marco. "Yes." "Did you believe him?" Margaret looked at her daughter. "I wanted to, but honestly, I think he was scared, and scared men make terrible decisions." "He destroyed my life." "No, he changed your life. There's a difference." Arya wanted to argue, to tell her mother that being forced into marriage wasn't just a change, it was a violation. But sitting there in the kitchen where she'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years, she couldn't find the words. Darian had been quiet through all of this. But now he spoke. "Mrs. Vale, can I ask you something?" Margaret looked at him. "Of course." "Do you regret your marriage?" "To Vincent? Some days, but not most days." "Why not?" "Because he gave me Arya, and whatever mistakes he made, that wasn't one of them." Darian nodded. "Thank you for saying that." After lunch, Arya walked through the house while Darian and her mother talked in the kitchen. She found her old bedroom exactly as she'd left it. Posters on the walls, books on the shelves. A life frozen in time. She sat on the bed and tried to remember who she'd been 3 months ago. The girl who thought she had choices. Who believed in fairness and justice and the idea that good things happen to people who worked hard. That girl felt like a stranger now. Darian appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" "I don't know. I keep trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be now." "You're supposed to be whoever you want to be." "That's not helpful." "It's honest." She patted the bed beside her. He sat. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" she asked. "Before Catherine died? Before you became this person everyone's afraid of?" "Every day." "Do you think you'll ever get back to that?" "No, but I'm learning to be okay with who I am now." "How?" "By accepting that people aren't fixed things. We're allowed to change, to evolve, to become someone new." Arya leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're very wise for a crime lord." "I've had a lot of time to think." They sat there for a while, two people trying to figure out how to build something real from broken pieces. When they left, Margaret hugged Arya again. "Come back soon, please." "I will." "And bring him. He's good for you." Arya glanced at Darian. "You think so?" "I know so. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him." "How do I look at him?" "Like you're not afraid anymore." That's said. That night, Arya couldn't sleep again. But this time, instead of going to the kitchen, she went to Darian's room, knocked softly. "Come in." He was reading in bed, the same way she'd found him weeks ago. He set down his book when she entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No, and I didn't want to be alone." He moved over, making space. She climbed into bed beside him, and he pulled the covers over both of them. "Thank you for today," she said, "for coming with me." "You don't have to thank me." "I know, but I want to." They lay there in the dark, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Darian?" "Yes?" "I think I'm starting to fall in love with you." He went very still. "You think?" "I'm not sure. I've never been in love before. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like." "What does it feel like now?" "Scary. Like I'm standing at the edge of something I can't see the bottom of." "That sounds about right." She turned to face him. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of you realizing you deserve better. Of waking up one day and finding out this was all just survival instinct and not actually love." "Is that what you think this is? Survival instinct?" "I don't know. Is it?" She thought about it. About the slap at the altar. The conversations in the kitchen. The way he'd stood between her and Marco without hesitation. The way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "No," she said. "It's not." "Then what is it?" "I think it's me choosing you. Actually, choosing you. Not because I have to. Not because I'm scared or grateful or have nowhere else to go. But because when I think about my life now, you're in it. And when I think about my life without you, it feels empty." Darian pulled her closer. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Really? That's kind of sad. Catherine used to tell me I had nice hands. That's about as poetic as it got. Arya laughed. Actually, laughed. You do have nice hands. Thank you. But that's not why I love you. You love me? I think so. Ask me again tomorrow when I've had more sleep. He kissed her forehead. I'll add it to my list. What list? Questions to ask you tomorrow. How long is this list? Getting longer by the minute. She settled against his chest. Tell me something true. Like what? Something you've never told anyone else. Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When Catherine died, I didn't cry at the funeral. Everyone expected me to, but I couldn't, and I felt like a monster. When did you cry? 3 months later, I was driving past a flower shop and saw peonies in the window. They were her favorite. I pulled over and cried for 2 hours in my car. Arya's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me that grief doesn't follow rules. It comes when it comes. Do you still grieve her? Every day. But it's different now. Less sharp. More like a dull ache that I've learned to live with. Do you think she'd like me? I think she'd love you. You're exactly the kind of person she'd want me to be with. Why? Because you don't let me get away with anything. Catherine was the same way. She called me on my bullshit constantly. You have a type. Apparently. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two damaged people learning how to be whole. The next week, Arya started making changes. She enrolled back in school. Not because Darian suggested it, but because she wanted to finish what she'd started. She also started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Chen who didn't judge and didn't offer easy answers. You've been through trauma, Dr. Chen said in their first session. Being sold into marriage, even if it turned out better than expected, is still trauma. You need to process that. I don't know how. By talking about it. By feeling it. By not pretending you're okay when you're not. So Arya started talking. About her father, about her mother's illness, about the wedding where she'd slapped Darian and meant it, about the slow, strange journey from hatred to something that might be love. At home, things shifted too. She and Darian stopped pretending they weren't building something. They had dinner together every night, talked about their days, argued about stupid things like what to watch on television and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It absolutely does not, Darian said. You're wrong, and you should be ashamed of yourself, Arya countered. I've committed crimes against humanity, and you think pineapple pizza is where I should draw the line? Yes, because at least your crimes made sense. They were happy. Not perfectly, not without complications, but genuinely, messily happy in the way real people are when they stop trying to be anything other than themselves. One night, 2 months after the confrontation with Marco, Arya asked Darian about the future. What do you want? She asked. From this. From us. Honestly? Honestly. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to hear you argue with me about pizza toppings. I want to watch you build the life you were supposed to have before I complicated it. You didn't complicate it. My father did. Fair point. What else do you want? Darian pulled her closer. I want you to be happy, actually, genuinely happy. And if that means with me, then I want that too. But if it doesn't, it does. You're sure? I'm sure. Say it again. I'm sure I want to be with you. I'm sure this isn't just trauma bonding or Stockholm syndrome or whatever else people might think. I'm sure that when I look at you, I see my future. And I'm okay with that. Okay isn't the same as happy. I'm happy too. I'm just still learning how to say it. He kissed her. And for the first time since the wedding, Arya felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 3 months after Marco left Valedoro, Arya graduated at the top of her journalism class. She'd gone back to school expecting whispers. Stares. Questions about why Darian Viscari's wife was sitting in lecture halls taking notes like a normal student. Instead, she found that most people didn't care. They had their own problems, their own lives. And the ones who did care quickly learned that Arya had no interest in being defined by who she'd married. Darian came to the graduation ceremony, sat in the back row, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars and looked completely out of place among the proud parents and crying relatives. When Arya's name was called, he stood and applauded like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. Afterward, they went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant that didn't have tablecloths or a wine list that required translation. "I'm proud of you," Darian said. "For finishing what I started? For not letting what happened define you." Arya twirled pasta around her fork. "It still defines me, just not in the way everyone expected." "Fair point. Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" Darian set down his wine glass. "Where is this coming from?" "I've been thinking about what my life would look like if you hadn't stepped in. If my father had gone through with Marco's plan." "Don't do that to yourself." "I'm not spiraling. I'm just curious. Would you do it again, knowing how hard it would be, knowing I'd hate you at first?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'd do it 1,000 times. Every single one would start with you slapping me at the altar, and every single one would be worth it. Even the nights I wouldn't talk to you? Especially those, they taught me patience. You were already patient. With other people, yes, but not with myself. You changed that." Arya squeezed his hand. "I love you. I know I don't say it enough, but I do." "You say it plenty." "No, I say, you're not completely terrible, and I suppose I'll keep you. That's not the same thing." "It is to me." They finished dinner and drove home along the coast. The ocean was calm tonight, reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. Arya watched it through the window and thought about all the things that had brought her here. Her father's desperation, her mother's illness, Marco's greed, Darian's impossible offer. Any of those things could have destroyed her. Instead, they'd remade her into someone stronger. When they got back to the estate, they found Elena waiting in the foyer with an envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it to Darian. "Courier delivered it an hour ago." Darian opened it, read the contents. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "What is it?" Arya asked. "Marco's dead." The words landed like stones in still water. Arya felt the ripples spread through her chest. "How?" "Car accident in Buenos Aires. Police are calling it suspicious, but haven't made any arrests." "Do you think someone killed him?" "I think Marco made a lot of enemies, and eventually, enemies catch up." Arya took the letter and read it herself. The details were sparse. Marco Salvatore, aged 57, found dead in a vehicle that had gone off a cliff outside the city. No witnesses, no evidence of foul play, but the investigation was ongoing. "Should I feel something?" she asked. "Relief? Guilt? Anything?" "You should feel whatever you feel. There's no right answer." She handed the letter back. "I feel nothing. Is that bad?" "No, it means you've moved on. That's healthy. Or it means I'm broken." Darian pulled her close. "You're not broken. You're resilient. There's a difference." That night, Arya dreamed of the cathedral, of walking down the aisle in a dress she hadn't chosen toward a man she didn't know. But this time, when she reached the altar, she didn't slap him. She took his hand and said yes without hesitation. She woke up crying and didn't know why. Darian was already awake beside her. "Bad dream?" "Not bad, just confusing." "Want to talk about it?" She told him about the dream, about the cathedral and the dress and the version of herself who'd said yes from the beginning. "Do you wish that had happened?" he asked. "That you'd wanted this from the start?" "Sometimes. It would have been easier." "Easier isn't always better." "No, but it would have hurt less." "Would it? Or would you have spent the rest of your life wondering if you'd made the right choice?" Arya thought about it. "I guess I'll never know." "I think you do know. You just don't want to admit it." "Admit what?" "That fighting for this, fighting for us, made it real in a way it never would have been otherwise." She turned to face him. "When did you get so smart? I've always been this smart. You were just too angry to notice." She hit him with a pillow. He caught it and pulled her closer. "I'm glad you slapped me," he said. "You're insane." "Maybe, but I'm also right. That slap was the most honest thing that happened that day. Everything else was performance. But that was real. It was assault. It was perfect." They lay there in the dark, And Arya realized that Darian was right. The slap had been the beginning, not of their marriage, but of their truth. Everything that came after, the arguments, the compromises, the slow erosion of walls, had built on that foundation. You couldn't fake that kind of honesty. You either had it or you didn't. And somehow, against every odd, they had it. The next morning, Arya's father called. She almost didn't answer, but something in her had shifted after Marco's death. Some understanding that holding on to anger was just another kind of prison. Hi, Dad. Arya, I heard about Marco. Everyone's heard about Marco. Are you okay? I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? Because he tried to destroy your life. I thought you might feel, I don't know, something. Arya walked to the window. Outside, gardeners were trimming the hedges. Normal work for a normal day. I feel like a chapter just closed, she said. Not a good chapter, not a bad one, just one that needed to end. That's very mature of you. I'm trying. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm in therapy. Did your mother tell you? No, she didn't. I started going after I got out of the hospital. The therapist says I have a gambling addiction, that I've been using it to cope with stress for years. Are you going to stop? I'm trying. It's harder than I thought it would be. Most things are. I'm also trying to make things right with your mother. With you. I know it'll take time. It'll take more than time, Dad. It'll take actual change. I know, and I'm working on it. I promise. Arya wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But another part, the part that had learned to be careful, knew that promises were just words until they became actions. I'm glad you're trying, she said, but I need you to understand something. What you did to me changed everything. I'm not the same person I was before the wedding, and I'm never going to be her again. I know, and I'm sorry for that. Don't be sorry I changed. Be sorry you forced me to. The line went quiet. Then Vincent said, You're right. I am sorry for that. For all of it. Thank you. Can I see you? Maybe coffee sometime? Arya thought about it. Let me think about it. That's fair? After she hung up, Darian found her in the library. How did it go? He asked. He's in therapy, says he's trying to change. Do you believe him? I want to, but I've learned not to trust want. Darian sat beside her. What do you trust? Evidence, time, patterns that prove consistency. That's very logical. I learned from the best. Catherine was never this logical. She operated entirely on instinct. And you? I operate on control, which is probably why we balanced each other. Arya leaned her head on his shoulder. Do we balance each other? I think so. You push me to feel things I'd rather ignore. I give you structure when everything feels chaotic. That's a nice way of saying I'm emotional and you're repressed. I was trying to be poetic. You should stop. It doesn't suit you. He laughed. Noted. 2 weeks later, Arya met her father for coffee. They chose a place downtown, neutral territory where neither of them had history. Vincent arrived first, looking thinner than he had at the hospital, more tired, like the weight of everything he'd done was finally catching up. Thank you for coming, he said when Arya sat down. I'm not promising anything. This is just coffee. I understand. They ordered, made small talk about the weather and traffic and all the meaningless things people discuss when they're avoiding real conversation. Finally, Arya said, Tell me about the gambling. When did it start? Vincent wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. Honestly, I think it's been there my whole life, but it got worse after your mother's diagnosis. Every time I felt helpless, I'd go to the casino, tell myself I was just blowing off steam. How much did you lose? Total? About $3 million over 5 years? Arya's stomach dropped. $3 million? I refinanced the house twice. Emptied your mother's trust. Borrowed from everyone I knew. And when that wasn't enough, I went to Marco. And he saw an opportunity. He saw exactly what I was. A desperate man with a beautiful daughter and no way out. Arya stirred her coffee. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even what you did. It's that you did it believing you were protecting me. I was trying to I know what you were trying to do, but protection without consent is just control with better PR. Vincent flinched. You're right. I know I'm right. The question is whether you actually understand that, or if you're just saying what you think I want to hear. I understand it. I swear I do. Then prove it. Stop making decisions for other people and let them make their own choices. Stop gambling. Stop lying. Stop pretending you're fine when you're not. I'm trying. Try harder. They sat in silence for a while. Then Vincent asked, Are you happy? With Darian? Yes. Really? Really, which is weird because I shouldn't be, but I am. He's good to you? He's better than good. He sees me, actually sees me. Not the version of me you wanted me to be or the version I thought I should be, just me. Vincent's eyes got wet. That's all I ever wanted for you? Then you should have let me find it on my own. I know that now. When they left the coffee shop, Vincent hugged her. Arya let him, but she didn't hug back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she was there, and that was something. Thank you for giving me a chance, Vincent said. I'm not giving you a chance. I'm just not slamming the door completely. There's a difference. I'll take it. Arya drove home and told Darian about the conversation. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she loved about him. He never tried to fix things that weren't his to fix. How do you feel? He asked when she finished. Tired, sad, relieved. All of it at once. That sounds about right. Do you think I'm doing the right thing, seeing him? I think you're doing what feels right for you. That's all that matters. What if I can't forgive him? Then you can't. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. It feels like it should be. Why? Because he's your father? That doesn't entitle him to anything except basic decency, and even that's negotiable. Arya kissed him. Thank you. For what? For not telling me what to feel. I learned that lesson the hard way with Catherine. She hated when I tried to manage her emotions. Smart woman. The smartest. 6 months after Marco's death, Darian asked Arya to marry him. They were already married, obviously. But this was different. This was a choice. They were in the garden at sunset, the same place where Arya had once sat and plotted escape routes. Now it just felt like home. Darian got down on one knee. Arya started laughing. What are you doing? She asked. Asking you to marry me. We're already married. I know, but you never said yes. Not really. So I'm asking again. He pulled out a ring, not the one from the first wedding that had been chosen by someone else. This one was simple, elegant. Arya. Arya Vale Viscari, will you marry me? Not because you have to, not because you're scared or grateful or have nowhere else to go, but because you actually want to spend the rest of your life with me. She knelt down in front of him. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard. Exactly, which makes it the worst by default. Is that a no? It's a yes, you idiot. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They planned a second wedding. Small this time. Just them, Elena, Thomas, Arya's mother, and a handful of people who actually mattered. No cathedral, no 400 strangers, just a ceremony in the garden with someone who wasn't a priest, but could legally marry them anyway. Arya wore a dress she'd chosen herself. Simple. White. Nothing like the monstrosity from the first wedding. When the officiant asked if she took Darian to be her husband, she said yes without hesitation. When Darian was asked the same question, he said, I do. Again. And I'll keep saying it for as long as she'll have me. They kissed. And this time, it felt like beginning instead of ending. The reception was held in the same garden. String lights, good food, music that didn't sound like it came from a hotel lobby. Arya danced with Darian while her mother cried happy tears and Elena pretended not to be emotional. This is what it should have been like the first time, Arya said. No, the first time needed to be what it was. Otherwise, we wouldn't appreciate this. Always the philosopher. Always. Later, when everyone had left and they were alone in the garden, Arya asked Darian what he wanted from the future. Same thing I've always wanted. You, happy, safe, building whatever life you want. What if what I want includes kids? He went very still. Kids? Eventually. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm 65 years old, Arya. I'm aware. I'd be 83 when they graduated high school. Math was never my strong suit, but yes, that sounds right. He pulled her close. Are you serious? I think so. Not right now, but someday. Is that something you'd want? I didn't think I'd want it, but with you, yes, I'd want that. Even knowing you might not be around for all of it? Even knowing that, because whatever time I have, I want to spend it building something that lasts beyond me. Arya kissed him. Then let's build it. They spent the next year just being married. Arya got a job at a local newspaper covering city politics. Nothing glamorous, but it was real journalism, and she was good at it. Darian started stepping back from some of his business operations, delegating to people he trusted and spending more time at home. They traveled, to places Catherine had loved and places Darian had never been. They ate good food and had terrible arguments about directions and learned how to exist in the same space without driving each other crazy. Mostly, they were happy. Not perfectly happy. Not every single day. But genuinely happy in the way people are when they've stopped trying to be anything other than themselves. Arya's relationship with her father improved slowly. He stayed in therapy, stopped gambling, started showing up to family dinners without being asked. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it was better than nothing. Her mother's cancer stayed in remission. Every 6-month checkup felt like holding your breath and then being allowed to exhale. Margaret started painting again, something she'd given up years ago, and her house slowly filled with canvases covered in colors that made Arya think of hope. One night, almost a year after the second wedding, Arya told Darian she was pregnant. They were in bed. She'd been carrying the news around for 3 days, trying to figure out how to say it. I have something to tell you, she said. He set down his book. Okay. I'm pregnant. He just stared at her. Say something, she said. Are you sure? I've taken 4 tests. I'm sure. Are you happy about it? I'm terrified. But also yes. Are you? He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. I'm more than happy. I'm grateful. For what? For you. For this. For getting a second chance at something I thought I'd lost forever. They cried together. Happy tears mixed with scared tears, mixed with the complicated emotions that come when life gives you something you didn't know you needed. The pregnancy was hard. Arya was sick for the first 4 months, exhausted for the next 3, uncomfortable for the last 2. Darian hovered like a nervous parent, which would have been annoying if it wasn't also kind of sweet. You need to relax, she told him when she was 8 months along. I'll relax when the baby's here. You'll be worse when the baby's here. Probably. Their son was born on a Tuesday in February, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair like Darian's used to be. Eyes that hadn't decided what color they wanted to be yet. They named him Julian, after no one in particular, just a name they both liked. Darian held him for the first time and cried. Actually cried. Arya had never seen him do that before. What is it? She asked. I didn't think I'd get this again. A family. A reason to come home. You had me. I know, but this is different. This is forever. I'm forever too. I know, but he'll outlive me. He'll carry pieces of both of us into a future I won't see. That's a different kind of forever. Arya understood what he meant. Julian was proof that they'd built something real, something that would last beyond them. The first year with Julian was chaos. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget your own name. But it was also joy. Watching him discover his hands, hearing his first laugh, seeing Darian, a man who'd built an empire on fear and control, turn into complete mush every time Julian smiled. Arya went back to work part-time. Darian cut his hours even more. They hired a nanny named Rosa, who was patient and kind and didn't judge them for being clueless first-time parents. Elena had retired by then, but she still came by twice a week to visit Julian. She brought him books and toys and stories about what Darian had been like as a young man. He was always serious, she told Arya one afternoon, even as a boy, but Catherine made him laugh. He laughs now, Arya said, because of you, and now because of this little one. Arya's father met Julian when he was 3 months old. Vincent held his grandson with shaking hands and cried. I'm sorry, he said to Arya, for everything. but mostly for almost robbing you of this. You didn't rob me of anything. You just made the road here more complicated. Still, I know. They were building something new. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The recognition that people are complicated and messy, and sometimes they make terrible choices for reasons that seem logical at the time. Arya had learned that you can't undo the past. You can only decide how much power you give it over your future. And she'd decided to give it less and less every day. When Julian was 2 years old, Darian had a heart attack. It happened on a Saturday morning. He was playing with Julian in the garden when he suddenly sat down and pressed his hand to his chest. Arya knew immediately something was wrong. She called for help, held his hand while they waited for the ambulance, and told him over and over that he was going to be okay. He survived. But the doctors said his heart was weaker than they'd like, that he needed to reduce stress, take medication, except that he wasn't invincible. "How long do I have?" Darian asked. "Could be 10 years, could be 20, could be less. There's no way to know." That night in the hospital, Arya sat beside his bed and held his hand. "You scared me," she said. "I scared myself. Don't do it again. I'll do my best. That's not good enough. It's all I can promise." She climbed into the hospital bed beside him. The nurses told her she couldn't, but she didn't care. "I'm not ready to lose you," she said. "I'm not ready to be lost." "Then fight. For me. For Julian. For all the years we're supposed to have together." "I will. I promise." He kept that promise for 8 more years. They were good years. Julian grew into a smart, curious kid who asked too many questions and had his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. Darian stepped away from business almost entirely, spending his days with his family instead of in meetings. They took trips, made memories, built a life that looked nothing like the one Arya had imagined that day in the cathedral, but was better than anything she could have planned. Darian's health declined slowly. More medications, more doctor's appointments, more conversations about what the future looked like. But he was there, present, fully engaged in every moment they had together. When Julian was 10, Darian sat him down and told him about his heart. "I'm not going to be around forever," he said, "and I need you to understand that." "How long do you have?" Julian asked. "I don't know. But however long it is, I want you to know that I'm proud of you, that I love you, and that you're going to be fine." "What about Mom?" "Your mom is the strongest person I know. She'll be fine too." "Will you?" Darian smiled. "I already am." He died on a Thursday morning in early spring, peacefully, in his sleep, with Arya beside him. She woke up and knew immediately that he was gone. Not because of anything dramatic, just because the rhythm of his breathing had stopped and the room felt different. She sat with him for a long time, held his hand, told him all the things she wished she'd said more often. Then she called Julian and her mother and started the process of saying goodbye to the man who'd changed her life. The funeral was small, private, just family and the few people who'd actually known Darian beyond his reputation. Julian gave a eulogy. He talked about his father teaching him to play chess, about the bedtime stories that always ended with some kind of moral lesson, about the way Darian had made him feel seen and valued every single day. Arya couldn't speak. Her grief was too raw, too new. So she just sat in the front row and let other people fill the silence. Afterward, at the estate that felt too empty now, her mother found her in the library. "How are you holding up?" Margaret asked. "I don't know. I keep expecting him to walk through the door." "That'll pass, eventually, but not quickly." "How did you do it when you thought you were dying?" "I focused on what I could control, on the moments I had instead of the ones I'd lost." Arya looked at her mother. "Do you think I made the right choice? Staying with him, loving him, building a life with someone I knew I'd lose?" Margaret took her daughter's hand. "I think you made the only choice that mattered. You chose to live fully instead of protecting yourself from pain. That takes courage." "It doesn't feel courageous. It feels like I'm drowning." "That's grief. But you'll learn to swim through it. You're stronger than you think." But it took Arya almost 2 years to feel like herself again. She went back to therapy. Dr. Chen helped her process the loss, the grief, and the complicated reality of loving someone who'd entered her life through force but stayed through choice. "You're allowed to mourn him without erasing the hard parts," Dr. Chen said. Both things can be true. He changed your life in ways you didn't ask for, and you loved him anyway. I still don't know if I've forgiven my father, Arya said, for starting all of this. Maybe you never will. Maybe that's okay. Is it? Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Understanding is. Arya thought about that a lot in the months that followed, about understanding versus forgiveness, about how you can acknowledge that someone hurt you while also acknowledging they were doing the best they could with the tools they had. Her father was at every family dinner now, sober, present, trying. He and Julian had a good relationship, not perfect, but real. And watching them together, Arya realized that maybe the greatest gift she could give her son was showing him that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to be the end of the story. When Julian turned 13, he asked about the wedding. The first one. "Mom, is it true you slapped Dad at the altar?" Arya looked up from her laptop. "Who told you that?" "Grandpa. He said you hit Dad in front of everyone." She thought about lying, making it sound less dramatic than it was. But Julian deserved the truth. "Yes, I slapped him." "Why?" "Because I was angry, scared, trapped, and I wanted everyone to know I wasn't going quietly." "Did it help?" "Honestly, yes. It was the first honest thing I did that day. Everything else was performance." "Do you regret it?" "Not even a little bit." Julian thought about that. "Grandpa said Dad didn't hit you back." "He didn't. He just stood there and let me feel everything I needed to feel. That's kind of cool." "Yeah, it was." "I miss him." Arya pulled her son close. "Me too. Every single day. Do you think he'd be proud of me?" "I know he would be." "How do you know?" "Because he told me. Every single day. He said you were the best thing we ever made." Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to be like him when I grow up." "Which part?" "The part that made you happy." Arya's throat tightened. "Then be yourself. That's what made him happy. That's what makes me happy. Just you being you." 5 years after Darian died, Arya was offered a position as editor-in-chief at a major newspaper in Valladoro. She accepted. Her first editorial was about second chances, about the ways life forces us into situations we don't choose and how we decide what to do with them. About her own story. Not all of it, but enough to be honest. She wrote about being sold into marriage, about hating the man who became her husband, about the slow, painful journey from anger to understanding to something that looked like love. She wrote about choice. Real choice. The kind that comes not from having options, but from deciding what you'll do with the options you're given. The piece went viral. People wrote to her, some angry that she'd stayed with Darian, some inspired by her honesty, some just grateful to hear that complicated stories could have hopeful endings. Arya read every letter, responded to the ones that mattered, and learned that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever felt trapped and found their way to freedom anyway. Julian graduated high school at 17, top of his class. Full scholarship to study law. He wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves, he said. Wanted to make sure people had choices. Arya knew exactly where that impulse came from, and she was proud. On the night before Julian left for college, they sat in the garden where she'd married Darian twice, where Darian had proposed the second time, where so much of their life had unfolded. "Are you going to be okay?" Julian asked. "Here by yourself?" "I'm not by myself. I have work, friends, grandma, and you'll be back for holidays." "It's not the same." "No, but it's what comes next." Julian looked around the garden. "Do you ever wish things had been different, that you'd met Dad some other way?" Arya thought about it, really thought about it. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but then I think about who we became because of how we met, and I realize that different wouldn't have been better, just easier, and easier isn't always what we need." "What do we need?" "To be challenged, to grow, to become people who can handle the hard things." "Did Dad challenge you?" "Every single day, and I challenged him right back." "Good. That's what love should be." "Where did you learn that?" Julian smiled. "From watching you two." After he left for college, Arya stood in the garden alone and thought about everything that had brought her here. The slap, the silence, The slow erosion of walls, the choice to stay, the choice to love, the choice to build something real from broken pieces. She thought about Darian's hands, the way he'd held Catherine's handkerchief, the way he'd held Julian for the first time, the way he'd held her when she needed it and given her space when she didn't. She thought about her father and the choices he'd made that had cascaded into her life and changed everything. About her mother and the quiet strength it took to survive. She thought about Marco and the threat he'd posed and how fear could push people to do terrible things or extraordinary things depending on who was holding it. And she realized something. Life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about deciding what you'd do with it when it found you anyway. She could have let the forced marriage destroy her. Could have spent her whole life hating Darian and her father and everyone who'd participated in that decision. Instead, she'd chosen something harder. She'd chosen to find her own power within the situation she'd been handed, to turn captivity into choice, to take something that began as a transaction and transform it into love. That was the lesson. That was the message. Not that forced marriage was acceptable, it never would be, but that even in the darkest situations, you could find light if you were willing to look for it. That you could be broken and still become whole. That love could grow in the most unlikely places if you gave it room to breathe. Darian had given her that room, had sat beside her that first night and offered a handkerchief instead of demands, had shown her that protection could look like patience, that power could be wielded with care, and she had given him something too. A second chance at family, at love, at becoming more than the sum of his worst actions. They'd saved each other, not in some romantic fairy tale way, but in the messy, complicated, deeply human way that people do when they choose to see each other instead of looking away. Arya walked back into the house that had once felt like a prison and now felt like home. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat in Darian's study, surrounded by books and memories and the quiet certainty that she'd lived a life worth living. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but a real one, built on truth and choice and the understanding that sometimes the best things come from the hardest beginnings. She raised her glass to the empty room, to Darian, to Catherine, to Julian, to everyone who'd played a part in her story. And then she started writing. Because there were other stories to tell. Other people who needed to hear that complicated could become beautiful if you were brave enough to let it. The house was quiet. The ocean outside whispered against the cliffs, and Arya Vale Viscari sat in the gathering darkness and felt, for the first time in a long time, completely at peace. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because she'd learned that perfect wasn't the point. Living was the point. Choosing was the point. Becoming yourself in the middle of chaos was the point, and she had done that, against every odd, despite every obstacle, through every moment of doubt and fear and rage. She had become exactly who she was meant to be, and that was enough.